Hi everyone. Today we're going to be looking at the first movement of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. I'm sure you're all at least aware of this piece in some way. I think it's not totally crazy to think of the symphony as kind of part of meme culture before that was a thing. Some people might be ticked off by that because they want to treat classical music as perpetually sacred and, I don't know, unaffected by culture and a changing world. But I think it's pretty cool that people all around the world, no matter their knowledge of classical music, at least know this iconic motive. Those three short notes followed by one long note. I don't know of any other classical composer who's transcended culture in that way, not even Mozart. But before we get going, I'd just like to ask that if you find this video useful or interesting in any way, just give us a thumbs up or consider hitting the subscribe button. We're still a very young channel, and every like and follow counts in a big way, especially at this stage. When we founded 515, we set out to try and democratize knowledge of classical music, which I think for a long time has been this very inaccessible subject. Whether that's because of how the information is presented or simply the financial barriers to entry, and there's a lot of them. We really want to push back against this idea that classical music is for just the elite, and that's a pretty toxic view of things. And it's such a falsehood, it's ridiculous. So if you want to follow along with us as we grow this channel and our site, it would be a massive help to get that like from you. So Symphony number 5, C minor, opus 67. Genre, quite obviously, symphony. RCM places its date of composition from 1807 to 1808, although that's not entirely accurate. The final push to get this piece done was, in fact, from 07 to 08. But Beethoven actually started work on this symphony in 04. Performing forces, I put them on the screen for you. I'm not going to read them out because that's a massive waste of both of our time. But please notice that it says trombones. Some people might tell you that the first time trombones were used in a symphony was in the last movement of Beethoven's Fifth, the last movement of this symphony, but that's actually not true. The first known use of trombones in a symphony comes from another symphony written in 1807 by a Swedish composer named Joachim Nicholas Egert. I have no idea if that's how you properly pronounce his name. So, anyways, there's some bar trivia for you. Let's rip through some basic first movement info. Key, C minor, form, sonata, tempo, allegro con brio, meter, 2/4. See, once we get a lot of this basic terminology down, things like sonata form, once we get that nailed down at the beginning stage of this course, we can sort of fly through a lot of it later on. Just so you're aware, the score I'm using for this video is actually a list transcription of Beethoven's Fifth, which I think sounds... This piece sounds pretty anemic on solo piano, which kind of makes sense, like it wasn't written for the instrument, so... But it does sort of help you in seeing what's going on without having to look at a full orchestral score, which can be daunting. That being said, the video with the score I've attached is actually a full orchestral score, so just be alive to that as you're going back and forth between the recording and this video. So here's our first theme, centered around what's sometimes called the Fate motif. It's our 3 short notes and 1 long note, offered first by the strings and clarinets. Notice that it's not a triplet with a long note. There's a rest. We got 3 equal eighth notes and then a long note. On that long note, we have a fermata, which halts the immediate flow of the theme, but it really builds up that tension. So when you come to the end of the fermata, and somehow there's this weird miracle about fermatas that everyone knows exactly how long it should be played, right? Like, if it's too short. Like, we obviously know it's too short if you just play the duration of the written note without the fermata. But even past that, if it's too short, and then you also know if it's gone on too long. But this is a perfect example. Everyone knows exactly how long this half note with the fermata is. It really builds up the tension, and then you're slingshot into the next iteration of the motive. Then we come to this almost humorously short bridge played by the horns, and this helps us modulate pretty quickly from C minor to E flat major, so the relative major of our tonic key. Again, we have that Fate motive, but it started to vary a little bit. And that brings us to the second theme, also in E flat major. It starts off with the woodwinds and first violins, and we have this long singing phrase in stark contrast to that wild first theme. Nevertheless, still nagging away underneath the surface, we hear the Fate motif in the cellos and basses. It doesn't give us or Beethoven any peace. It then transitions into the codetta, which features, you guessed it, the Fate motif. The exposition is brought to a close with a bunch of authentic cadences. You really can't miss it. Now, those are the only excerpts that the RCM gives us for the first movement, which is fair given that we have a heck of a lot of repetition in the development and recap. So I'm just going to pop a few notes up on the slides for you as we go through the development and recap. Development starts off with the Fate motif again, but this time just in the French horns. And somehow this particular iteration of it is just terrifying. The development is really just Beethoven messing around with these four notes. This Fate motif it really is just four notes. Sometimes he'll invert the motif, so instead of going down at the end, we go up. Sometimes he fills in that intervallic gap between the short notes and the long notes, or the long note. And then the RCM has this funny line that there is expansion of the passage through forceful repetition. I think the entire movement, and given that this piece is cyclical structure, the entire piece can be thought of as just an expansion of the Fate motif through forceful repetition. In the development, we also get, as we do throughout the rest of the movement, really abrupt contrasts in character and color. And that's very typical of Beethoven. Seemingly random accents, sudden outbursts, and then almost startlingly moments of extreme tenderness. The development ends with this pounding away at the Fate motif by the entire orchestra until we get back to where we started. In other words, the end of the development elides into the beginning of the recapitulation. We get the first theme, then, surprisingly, everything just sort of pauses for a moment to hear this tender oboe cadenza that we didn't have back in the exposition. So I'm going to toss that up on the screen for you. Very short, but it's this lovely little thing. It's very... the RCM was correct when they characterized this as being very melancholic. Our tiny bridge that we talked about in the exposition does make a reappearance. This time we don't modulate, so we can stay in the tonic key, but when we get to the second theme, something's a bit different. Beethoven does modulate, but he doesn't modulate to the relative major. He goes to the parallel major. He goes to C major. So how weird is that? Our codetta stays in C major, but then when we hit the coda, we drop back into C minor. So back into our tonic key. The coda is almost like another development in the way that Beethoven starts parsing the motive apart, again, in new ways. He just can't stop with this thing. But don't worry, the movement is actually coming to a close this time. And that is it for this lecture. Thank you for listening.